I'll just keep going. For the content warning. 10, 9, 8.
Welcome back to At the Desk, your favorite crime, history, and politics show. I'm Nikolai Wagner.
And I'm Lauren Perry.
In today's episode, we will be taking a dive into the recent Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal, taking a look at the global history of the death penalty, having a spirited debate about the death penalty, and exploring the American history of the death penalty. With that being said, please take a seat with us at the desk. Welcome back to At the Desk. To start, we'd like to mention Donald Trump's inauguration that took place yesterday and the effects his presidency is already having on foreign policy. Trump has already announced he is withdrawing from the U.S. Paris Agreement as well as the World Health Organization. Trump also signed an executive order declaring a 90-day pause in the disbursement of U.S. development assistance. Now we turn over to the Middle East, where a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hamas.
A ceasefire deal between Israel and the Palestinian group Hamas has gone into effect in Gaza. The first 6-week phase of the ceasefire agreement will see some of the Israeli and Gaza released exchange for Palestinian prisoners held by Gaza. Here's the journey of the deal since the war began on October 7, 2023.
The first truce occurred over 6 weeks after the fighting began, when Israel and Hamas agreed to a 4-day truce on November 21, 2023. After weeks of negotiations led by Qatar, the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, called a meeting with his cabinet in which they approved a truce deal. The truce deal ended up being extended to 7 days, but after Benjamin made it clear that the halt with fighting was only temporary and Israel was not ending its war on Gaza, the war resumed on December 1, 2023.
In May of 2024, Egyptian and Qatari officials worked with the Americans to find an agreement. Then Hamas leader Haniyeh said on May 6 that this group has accepted a proposal. This agreement was set to take place in 3 stages, the first stage to last 42 days. In the first stage, Hamas stated they would release 33 Israeli captives in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons. In the second phase, the Israeli army would withdraw from Gaza. Israel, however, said that they had not agreed to the terms of the ceasefire, and soon after, Israel launched an invasion of Rahav in southern Gaza. In late May, Joe Biden said Israel had agreed to an enduring ceasefire proposal, but Netanyahu later rejected the plan and carried on the war.
On November 27, 2024, a ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon occurred. The two sides started fighting on October 23, 2023, as the Lebanese group Hezbollah said that it was fighting in Israel in solidarity with Gaza. As a part of the ceasefire, Hezbollah pulled attacks back its infrastructure north of the Litani River, and the Lebanese armed forces deployed to South Lebanon. The ceasefire also states that Israeli troops should withdraw from South Lebanon before the 60-day ceasefire period ends.
On January 15th, negotiators reportedly reached a deal after 15 months of war. Despite opposition from far-right ministers, an Israel cabinet meeting approved the deal this past Saturday. Netanyahu demanded that for the ceasefire to occur, Hamas would have to provide the names of the first 3 Israeli captives to be released. These 3 Israel women were set free by Hamas-led Palestinian militants who held them hostage in Gaza for 471 days.
Hours after this, the Israeli prison service released 90 Palestinians outside Ofer prison in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. This was the first of hostage and detainee exchanges set to take place throughout this planned 6-week ceasefire in Gaza that is aimed at ending the 15-month war. This is expected to lead to the release of more than 730 Palestinian prisoners and detainees, as well as more than 1,100 people from Gaza who are being held by Israel. Negotiations to extend the deal are expected to occur in the coming weeks.
We hope you enjoyed our look into some interesting and important events on the Middle East and the ceasefire deal. It's always good to look at politics, not just from a United States perspective, but from the eyes of other nations. Once again, I'm Lauren Perry, joined by
Nikolai Wagner.
And we've enjoyed bringing you another edition of At the Desk International. Now it's time to send it over to the history panel, taking a look at the death penalty.
Okay.
Howdy, folks, and welcome back to Season 3 of At the Desk and the History Panel. Hope y'all had a great break and a nice long weekend. We're back here with a themed episode for you all to kick off the new year. And during it, we'll be talking all things death penalty. Very fun. Starting off with us, we're going to talk about the history of the death penalty as a concept, then pass it to a specialty panel to debate on the concept as a whole. It'll be fun, it'll be difficult, but maybe you'll learn something along the way. So let's get right into it. I want to start off with crucifixion because I think that's maybe the most famous kind of death penalty that's not modern. I don't know, guillotine, it's up there. Who knows? But it starts in the 6th century BC, and it was first used by the Persians, and then it was brought from Persia, it was brought over to the Eastern Mediterranean, and it was brought from the Eastern Mediterranean over to Rome. And as we all know, Jesus Christ was killed using crucifixion. So yeah, if you want to give us a little bit more on crucifixion to get started.
Yeah, so crucifixion, how it works is that your limbs are nailed to a wooden structure. When I was younger, I fully thought that they just tied you to the wooden structure and then they just left you to starve. That's how I thought it worked. And so I think I watched a movie when I saw them actually nailing someone's hands. I was like, oh, that's why that's so bad. But the one thing to note with crucifixion is that it not only served to deter potential criminals and obviously to punish criminals, but it was also a humiliation ritual. So that kind of idea of putting on a show for everybody to see, if you cross the line, this is what's going to happen to you as well. And also that double whammy of, we're killing you and we're also going to humiliate you in the process of it. So that was, I think, one of the key things about crucifixion is that it's such a gory and morbid way to die. Showy.
And now, because of Jesus Christ, it's such a symbol now too. More recently, crucifixion has been used symbolically as punishment. For instance, ISIS might have allegedly used crucifixion-style punishments as recently as the 2010s in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. And then, Jamie, do you have anything else to add on crucifixion?
Well, it is very much like Yaya said. It is a sort of, it's setting an example of this person, right? It's to deter other people from committing the crimes or committing the the infractions that led them to be nailed to this cross. Mm-hmm. It is just such a gruesome way to go. Yeah. Again, I shared a similar experience learning that they're actually nailing through your limbs. But actually, a fun fact I believe is true is in some cases it's either starvation or dehydration that kills them, but it's also suffocation
from the smoke.
Perhaps, but also their neck eventually sort of sags and they end up sort of choking on themselves because they can't keep their head up that long anymore.
Yeah.
So
something else I read about that too is that they would light fires underneath to speed things up.
That's
people would
possible, yeah.
suffocate. Yeah, that's where I was getting the smoke thing from, because they would light
Okay.
fire, so they'd suffocate, and then they would die from bleeding out. But
Probably a cocktail of things.
yeah, absolutely. And then Shay.
Yeah, so just like everyone else said, it absolutely was a humiliation ritual. And, in some cases, they would leave the victims there on the crucifix right after so people could look at them and really let that sit. And just to add on to it, even though artists, typically depict people on a cross with either a loincloth or a covering of the genitals, a lot of these people were stripped naked. And I think that just adds to the humiliation aspect of it. Like, these people were truly given no mercy. However, one historical fact I will say, since we were talking about the crucifixion of Christ, is according to all 4 canonical gospels, there was a prevailing Passover custom in Jerusalem that allowed the governor of Judea to commute one prisoner's death by popular acclaim. So to me, that really just goes to show that this was a show of power. Crucifixions, as much as it was a spectacle, it was also a show of power.
Yeah.
You have the people watching it, but you also have the government say that y'all are at our mercy.
Yes.
And
Like Pontius Pilate washing his hands clean of Jesus. And then, speaking of power, down the line of 4th century AD, Constantine, he was the one who outlawed it. He was the first Roman Catholic leader of Rome. And then continuing with Rome, I want to talk a little bit about gladiators, which is a little bit more fun than crucifixion. So the term actually in ancient languages would be dannato o gladium, which means condemned to the sword. Now, a little bit about gladiators. We know the movies. We know Paul Mescal, very handsome guy. But we also know from history that they weren't exactly all prisoners. A lot of these people were bought by rich men and fought. But they were also kind of local celebrities. Like, some of them were treated very well, and they were allowed to roam around the town. So anything to add about gladiators they found interesting?
I mean, there definitely is a distinction between you are put in this arena to fight to entertain, and you are put in this arena because we know you're going to die, which is also entertaining.
Mhm.
So yeah, there were these champions, but mostly those were hand-selected by the emperor himself. But the other ones, like the war criminals, enslaved individuals, criminals in general, they were forced to fight as a show of the power of the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a common misconception that gladiators always fought to death. In fact, fighting usually continued until one gladiator surrendered. Now, there were specific cases called a sine missio battle, which meant the loser would automatically be killed. However, this wasn't always what happened. I think a lot of people viewed these gladiators as almost an investment, as messed up as that sounds, but it was expensive to house them, expensive to feed them. So they didn't want them to die. They wanted them to provide as much entertainment value as possible and keep fighting.
Mm-hmm. And they knew it was a good investment, too, to keep them alive.
I think it's so interesting that, like, when you go further down in history, this idea of seeing people like bleed to death is entertainment. And I think as we move forward, you see this kind of shifting behavior, especially with the rise of Christianity and this whole idea of treating people humanely, that it kind of decreases that aspect of like watching people die for entertainment. It's like kind of gory, it's unseemly. But I just kind of want to be in the minds of people. Like, I'm very squeamish, to be very honest. So if I saw somebody, like 2 people fighting to death with a sword, somebody's ear comes off, I would throw up on the spot. So it's so shocking to me to know that people really use that for entertainment. So I guess I want to say thank God for cable.
And progressing past the gory part of everything into the medieval era, which comes right after this Roman era of empires, we also get into medieval torture methods, which we won't spend too much time on because we are limited. But my favorite that I learned about is the Pear of Anguish.
Her favorite?
I just thought I liked the name. I think Pear of Anguish. Did you read about that one too?
I've been known about that one.
You've known about the Pear of Anguish? Not very fun.
Medieval torture expert right over here.
Not
I'm the
very
resident
fun.
expert, guys.
No.
Watch
But
out for these guys.
as we keep progressing past all the medieval torture stuff, we don't want to spend too much time on it. I do want to get to the guillotine, which is one of the most famous kinds of ways to go out in history. Of course, we have the French Revolution, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. But it was actually invented by a guy whose last name was Guillotine, which I thought was very fascinating. I did not know that. I thought it was named after maybe the form that it did or something like that. But it was invented by Joseph Ignace Guillotine. I can't say that as well as you probably could. But they made a law, actually, to make that all executions were done by machine in France, which is what led to the guillotine.
Well, did you know when he realized, so there was like something that happened and he realized that the heads of the people that would be guillotined stayed alive for like 30 seconds afterwards because of suffocation is how they would die. And so once he figured that out, he was like, yo, can we not? Like, I don't, this
That's
is not humane at
insane.
all.
Like,
And everyone else was like, what? It's named after you, though. Like, we can keep doing it.
Do you think he wanted that to happen? Like, imagine waking up and you're like, hey, I made this machine. And
No,
everyone's like,
definitely
you know what? Let's name it after you. I feel like, let's not actually.
Yeah.
But can you imagine, like, your head is rolling and you just, like, your eyes are, like, twitching around and you just see your body.
You're
just
all about the gore
insane.
today.
for 30. I
Really
swear to
getting into
God,
the death
I
part of
can't
this
see
thing.
it, but I can think about it. But, like, I think also, I like that you mentioned how there's a law passed that deaths and executions has to be made by machines, because it kind of feels like they're trying to now distance themselves from the actual act of executing someone, making it more impersonal. Because with the crucifixion, like, that's somebody going up, nailing you on. With the gladiator fights, that's somebody else, like, who's sentenced to, like, basically kill someone else. There's, like, that human interaction part, but when you now introduce machines, it becomes more impersonal and less of a I'm doing this because it's entertaining and more of a I'm doing this because it's what justice dictates.
But you also have to think, was this used for justice in the French Revolution?
Good
Because there was that
question.
whole reign of terror where people were being
Robespierre.
guillotined left and right.
I mean, I just think it evolved into something so much bigger than what guillotine intended it to be. Because you had kids in the French Revolution like playing with it and beheading mice with it. I mean, if kids, like if a kid today, you know, harms animals like that, people get very worried.
Yeah.
As
they
should be.
As
You should be. And I think it just goes to that concept of mass hysteria and mass catharsis almost. You have people that were so repressed and they saw this almost as an out. Obviously, it's not a very healthy way of doing that, but
Right.
it almost allowed people to like express their anger in a time when they were so repressed.
Yeah.
And as we
And
keep going with the machines, we
yeah.
get to the electric chair. Jamie, if you could talk a little bit about the electric chair for us.
Well, certainly. So the electric chair, it would pass current through your body until you died, basically. But as you can see, there's sort of as we move forward in history and start discussing these different contraptions that all kill people, there is a shift to sort of privacy and minimalism. So in a lot of cases, a difference between maybe the guillotine and the electric chair is that in a lot of cases, the electric chair would be happening behind closed doors, right? So there's it's almost like a getting it done, instead of it making it into a big spectacle for other people to see. It's just sort of what is the most humane and quick way of doing it, and that was their answer at the time.
Yeah, efficiency over spectacle
Exactly.
definitely became a big thing. It was invented by Alfred P. Southwick, who was a dentist actually, and he was also an engineer. He experimented on dogs, unfortunately. It was the 1800s, but he definitely was not a good man. He figured it out after watching a homeless person electrocute themselves by touching a generator back in the day. So not a fun way to invent something. Not as fun as Ben Franklin holding a kite and getting shocked, but definitely something that's very interesting. In fact, one of my favorite things about this that I find very interesting is that it was used in Nebraska until 2009.
It's still the primary means in South Carolina for execution.
When I think about
Capital
it,
punishment.
it's like, because sometimes, something funny happens or someone says something that's out of pocket and you're like, electric chair. It's like, no, you shouldn't be saying that. That's bad. That's really bad. Like,
and of course, the
it's not
natural
good.
progression of the electric chair, we get to the lethal injection, which is what is used today, invented by Dr. J. Chapman. Audrey, if you could talk a little bit about the lethal injection.
Yeah,
for us.
definitely. So 1977, Oklahoma was the first U.S. state to approve the use of the lethal injection. Basically, if you were being administered that punishment, you would be strapped down to a table and people would put you under. It was like a 3-step process. There were 3 different drugs. I could not tell you the drug names for the life of me, so sorry. The first one would put you to sleep. The second one would stop the airflow to your lungs, and then the third one would stop your heart. And it's a pretty flawed system because, especially if they can't find good veins, it's
not always
a
professionals
great-
doing
no.
it either. The first man executed in this way was Charles Brooks Jr., and he killed a car salesman in the car that the guy was trying to sell him. So that was in 1967, excuse me. So not a fun start to the semester, talking about a lot of death, but that's okay, because that's all we have for today, folks. So now we're going to send it over to our really fun debate panel to state their piece on the morality and legality of the death penalty. So stay seated in those electric chairs, and we'll be right back.
Make sure you're getting level. Like, can you level? Three, two, one.
We are once again back at the desk. Today we have something very special for you. The death penalty is one of the most talked about and debated topics in not just American, but world politics. The questions surrounding the moral and practical repercussions of capital punishment have been on people's minds for centuries. To give this red-hot topic the attention that it needs, I will be moderating a debate between two sides of the debate, one being pro-death penalty and one being anti-death penalty. So everyone, first and foremost, this topic is obviously very controversial, shall we say. So I want to make sure everyone keeps it respectful here, but I want to have a very, very seasoned and a very good debate here.
We'll shake hands after
Yes,
the debate.
after the debate, please shake hands, yes. So I want to start over here with you guys. I want to start with Sam. Please give an opening statement. I want you guys to give about a minute.
Okay. When discussing justice, we must consider what we owe to the victims and their families. Think about your loved ones. Now think about this. Then being pulled from their bed and their homes at night, being driven to a field, being injected with cocaine, raped, and strangled to death. It seems too horrific to be true. Well, that is how 13-year-old Stephanie McCaney was killed. Keith Darden, 29, was shot in the head twice before being emasculated and shot once more in the head. Keith's 3-year-old son, Peter Darden, was bludgeoned to death. Then Elaine Darden, Keith's 30-year-old pregnant wife, suffered such a severe beating she went into labor and gave birth to her daughter, who was beaten to death within a minute of being brought into this world. These are actions done by Tommy Lynn Sells. He is believed to have committed at least 22 murders, with Sells himself claiming over 70 victims. 70 innocent lives were lost. Those 70 people were someone's best friends and someone's children. Do you think this man deserves to continue to breathe, be fed, and sleep after stripping 70 futures? How about stepping out of the United States? Adolf Eichmann, one of the main contributors to the Holocaust, the person that organized what we now call the final solution, which means the killing of European Jews. To quote Eichmann, he said, "To be frank with you, had we killed all of them, the 10.3 million European Jews, I would be happy and say, all right, we managed to destroy the enemy. 6 million Jews were killed, and men like Eichmann were happy. Both Eichmann and Sells were executed on behalf of their horrific crimes. So I stand before you today to address why capital punishment remains a necessary component of our criminal justice system. The death penalty serves not just as punishment, but as society's ultimate declaration that certain crimes are so heinous, so destructive to the fabric of our civilization that they warrant the most severe consequence possible. While no punishment can bring back those who were lost, the death penalty ensures that perpetrators of the most horrific crimes face the ultimate consequence for their actions. It provides a measure of closure to grieving families and sends a clear message about society's values. The Constitution permits capital punishment, and the Supreme Court has consistently upheld its constitutionality when properly administered. Our system provides extensive due process and protections and appeals to ensure that this ultimate sanction is carried out with the utmost care and consideration. While we must always strive to ensure its fair and judicious application, capital punishment remains a necessary tool of justice, one that honors victims, protects society, upholds our most fundamental values about the sanctity of human life.
Okay, that was a very long one. Thank you, Sam. So I'd like to give you guys your opener now.
Yes, so Jackson, I'll make sure to keep mine under a minute. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, of the studio, of the control room, of the people here next to me, Justice is an abstract topic, and throughout human history, society has tried its best to deliver justice in a way that is swift and fair. And it's not always been the case. The death penalty, while the arguments for it are logical and moral, and I 1000% agree with you that people who commit these types of heinous crimes should not be given a chance to live. However, I'm also of the belief that death is too swift of a punishment for those who commit these types of crimes. Additionally, I would like to say that the death penalty is not a good deterrent for crime, actually, as we will get on into later on. There's no strong evidence that it actually deters people from committing these heinous crimes. So no matter how many people we put on death row, no matter how many people we inject with these lethal chemicals, these will still happen. Not only is it not an effective deterrent, it actually is very costly to taxpayers in America. And we have to look at the morality of the death penalty. How can we, as the supposed leader of morality of the world, as the supposed beacon of democracy, practice such a punishment that countries that we say we are ideologically opposed to, like Iran and Saudi Arabia and Somalia, practice as well? You know the old adage, when you point a finger, 3 more fingers point back at you. How can we distance ourselves ideologically from those that we think are backward or barbaric when we ourselves are practicing the same things?
Okay, thank you, Yaya. So I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Lowy. Do you have a rebuttal? Yes.
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say, I 100% understand what you're saying with the fingers analogy and talking about other countries. A lot of different ideological countries in terms of views to us definitely favor the death penalty more than I think us two would. But when it comes to the certain individuals that we listed, for example, Adolf Eichmann, Jeffrey Dahmer, these are people that have just brutally, killed people in some of the worst ways possible. We have rape before death. We have, what else? We have torture before death. Jeffrey Dahmer's eating people's limbs. I mean, does this person deserve to breathe? Ryan.
City?
Well, start. I think the Eichmann situation is a particularly unique situation given the circumstance at the time that it was a world court trying him. I think that isn't really relevant to what our discussion is.
Why not?
So I do want to get a clarification from you too. So you two believe that if there is a world government involved situation, a war crime situation like with Adolf Eichmann, the death penalty should be applied there?
I don't have a solid answer for you right now, but as far as the United States goes, there should not be a death penalty.
Should be a death penalty. Okay. So your response to that, do you guys believe that the death penalty should be applied anywhere within the United States and in the international? Just a quick clarification.
First of all, this guy's a great moderator. He went both sides. Very fair. Good job. And second of all, I do think that the death penalty should exist in the United States and across the world, but I think that there definitely needs to be some change. Like, for example, the state of Texas, not a good example of the death penalty.
Yes. So Texas is one of the most commonly places, one of the places where, yes, that and Alabama and certain southern states.
So does the Trump administration for the United States.
And I would like to get a clarification from you guys. Do you guys believe there's any form of death penalty that is not ethical? That is used in the United States, I'd like to clarify.
Personally, in my opinion, lethal injection, since there's not a lot of research that the criminals don't feel pain, that is not my favorite type of execution. If I had to choose, I would choose the firing squad for many reasons. If people don't know what the firing squad is, basically a bunch of people line up, the criminals right here. Everyone has bullets, some are blanks, and one person has a regular bullet. They shoot, and obviously the one person has the bullet is the one that kills the person. And that is better for the executioners as well, because they don't know that they are the ones killing them, so it's easier on them mentally. And also they get shot in the head. So we have seen through research and through everything else that they don't feel pain. So that is personally my favorite. We see lethal injection now used. Now gas is starting to be used. We do see the electric chair, not as common. So if I had an opinion, personally, the firing squad would be my choice of execution.
All right, Stalin. Personally,
no name calling. Let's calm that down now, please.
Sorry.
May I make a point, please?
Yes,
so you talked about, repeat his name for me, Eichmann? Yes?
Yes, yep. Adolf Eichmann.
Yes.
He was a Nazi Adolf Eichmann.
Brutal crimes. We talk about rape, we talk about murder, but I would like to point out the fact that so many rapists don't get condemned at all. So you have more people on death row that are more likely to be innocent than actual rapists. So before even looking at the death penalty, we can overthrow your whole argument, because a lot of people that are being subjected to lethal injection, a lot of people that were subjected to the electric chair, a lot of people that might be subjected to the firing squad can be proven innocent at some point. I'd also like to talk about the amount of time that people sit on death row. Death row is not, you don't get sentenced today and then 2 weeks later you're being put down. This can take up to decades. We have seen people sitting on death row for 20 years. Not only is that harming them psychologically, especially in the case of if they're innocent, but it's also putting so much strain on the prison system. Figures range for how much taxpayers pay to keep one inmate on death row. Figures range from the $1 to $1.5 million mark per death row inmate. Because of more expensive living conditions, you have to keep them in solitary confinement. A more extensive legal process, you have to pay the legal fees. And that's coming out of our pockets. I don't know about you guys, but I'm 21. I don't want to be paying for somebody that's going to be sitting on death row until my kids are born.
Yes.
Increasing resistance to the...
I want to get clarification from them. Do you guys believe that the death row waiting time should be significantly shorter? They should be executed faster if they are convicted?
No, because I agree with her that there is a possibility that they could be found innocent, or, for example, in Joe Biden's case, he feels that the death penalty is not warranted. There needs to be checks and balances in our system. For example, with pardons and all that, and reductions of sentences. Pardon me. I actually feel like Joe Biden myself talking like that. But as I was saying, I feel like there does need to be a buffer period between actually administering the death penalty and actually being given the death penalty, because of that chance of being found innocent. And not only that, I think that there needs to be clear and concrete evidence. For example, we're looking at the Parkland shooter right now with Cruz. He did not get the death penalty. He deserves it. There are both liberal and democratic-minded people that were affected and in court during his sentencing, and they all wanted him to get the death penalty and thought life imprisonment was not appropriate.
Interesting point. Okay, so we're going to finish this half of the debate, and now we're going to head over to the halfway mark. So now this debate has reached its halfway mark. We would like to toss over to Brady Welsh to give us some context in the American history of the death penalty. Take it away, Brady.
Thanks, Jackson. The story of capital punishment in the United States begins in colonial Jamestown, Virginia. The colonies were recently founded and settlers were beginning to create laws for this new world. The death penalty had already been used in Europe for a long time, so the colonists decided to incorporate it into their legal system. The first colonial execution came in 1608, 1 year after Jamestown was established. Captain George Kendall, a high-ranking member of the First Council of Jamestown, was sentenced to death after accusations that he was giving information about the colonies to Spain, which was considered treason. Instead of hanging him, which was the most popular method of execution at the time, Kendall was executed by firing squad because of his high ranking. After Kendall, there were 4 more executions in the colonies until the execution of Jane Champion, the first woman in the United States to receive a death sentence. She was sentenced to death after she had a stillborn child from an affair and was accused of ending its life. However, it is still largely unknown to this day whether she was really guilty or not, as there are no records of any evidence being presented at her trial. From then on, capital punishment went mostly unquestioned until 1767, when Italian criminologist Cesare Beccaria wrote on crimes and punishments, an essay in which he wrote that the idea that there is no justification for a state to take someone's life. This essay played a key role in the creation of the death penalty abolitionist movement in the states. By the early 1800s, it seemed to be working. Many U.S. states reduced the number of capital crimes and built state penitentiaries rather than sending prisoners to their demise. In 1834, our very own Commonwealth of Pennsylvania became the first member of the U.S. to initiate the shift of executions from public squares to inside correctional facilities. 13 years after Pennsylvania made this change, the abolitionist movement got their first major victory in 1847 as Michigan became the first state to abolish the death penalty for all crimes except treason. At the same time, the other states were introducing new methods of execution, such as electrocution and cyanide poisoning. Jump to the early 20th century when the abolitionist momentum picked back up and several states either abolished or significantly limited the use of the death penalty. This progress was slowed due to World Wars I and II, which caused widespread panic in the country. By the 1930s, most states had reverted back to the use of the death penalty, and there was an average of 167 executions per year, the highest of any decade in U.S. history. The abolitionist movement then experienced a resurgence in the 20th century when the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which proclaimed a right to life. In 1966, a poll by the news organization Gallup showed that support for the death penalty had reached an all-time low at only 42%. In 1972, the Supreme Court case Furman versus Georgia declared that the death penalty was unconstitutional, effectively banning it in America for 4 years until it was reinstated in a second Supreme Court case, Gregg versus Georgia. Since then, many states have made their own laws pertaining to the death penalty, and it has remained a huge debate in America. Today, 23 states, along with Washington, D.C., have completely abolished the death penalty. However, 27 states still have it in full effect. This could potentially change in the near future, as yesterday President Trump signed an executive order seeking to expand the use of the death penalty, continuing the debate on whether or not capital punishment is truly justified. But for now, we'll have to wait and see. Back to you, Jackson.
Thanks, Brady. We welcome you back to our debate. I want to start with the anti-death penalty side over here. So I want to ask a question about, do you guys believe that the death penalty has been something that has been used disproportionately against minorities and against marginalized groups?
I'm so glad you asked that question, Jackson. That was exactly what I was going to get into. So in the academic world of politics, when we look at the state as an entity, the state is said to be the sole legitimate arbiter of violence. But when you look at a state with, as in the United States, that has a long history of racial bias towards minorities, is it really possible, is it really plausible to think that the administration of the death penalty is not going to be without some racial bias when almost all facets of American life have been tainted by it at some point or another in the history? A lot of studies have been done. Black and Hispanic people make up 31% of the population, but 53% of death row inmates. I don't want to hear any of that 13% of the thing, 50% of the crime statistics. If you have a bag of marbles with different colors, 17 green, 5 red, and all you pick out are red marbles, you're clearly looking for those red marbles. You're picking up what I'm putting down. A study in 2017 that was done in Oklahoma found that cases with white female victims, cases with white male victims, and cases with minority female victims are significantly more likely to end with a death sentence in Oklahoma than are cases with non-white male victims. So not only is there racial bias in the perpetrator of the crime, because Black defendants are more than 4 times more likely to be sentenced to death than similarly situated non-Black defendants. It also matters the race of the victim. So white victims and female victims are more likely to be compensated with the death penalty than non-white male victims. So that disparity in and of itself, I agree with you that some criminals should not be allowed to live, but until you can say for sure that there's no racial bias in this, I think it's best to just hold off on the death penalty. We talk about people like Marcellus Williams, who was recently killed when millions of people had signed the petition and there was still an ongoing case. So I think that in a country where, and this happens all the time, everywhere, not just the United States, racial minorities are often more targeted. So I think that when there's means to use a death penalty for those kinds of purposes, it's best to just hold off.
Okay. And so do you agree with her on the stance of once the racism is filtered out of the justice system, death penalty could be applied more, or are you still staunchly against the death penalty entirely?
I'm still staunchly against it entirely because I just don't think it's a deterrent to crime.
Okay, and do you have some statistics to back that up?
Of course. You were talking earlier about Texas, Alabama, states like that, states that all use the death penalty more than most other states. Those states are also among the highest in crime rate. It's not deterring any crime down there.
Well, there's other factors, of course.
There's other factors.
You're underestimating. Pardon me. Ooh, it's been a rough day for me. I'm sorry. You're underestimating the effect of the weather. I'm serious about that. Studies have shown that the hotter that it gets, the more intense crime gets.
But I'd say that I can shoot back and say that you're overestimating the effect of the death penalty as a deterrent. Because if it really was a deterrent, then you'd be seeing less homicides.
I don't think we're arguing that it's a deterrent. I think we're more just arguing that it's necessary for certain individuals.
Our homicides per capita is not significantly different than any country that doesn't have the death penalty.
But I study, I'm a criminology major, and we study deterrence heavily, and there is actually no evidence that life in prison is also a deterrent for crime. There's actually no evidence that any sort of confinement is a deterrent for crime, which I don't think is an argument for the death penalty. I think it's more of an argument for our justice system as a whole, and maybe implementing less confinement in our justice system and more rehabilitation. So I think that's a different argument. And so no, there's no evidence that the death penalty is a deterrent, but there's also no evidence that like life in prison is a deterrent as well.
So I want you. So in that case, I want you to come to a quick agreement. So if there's no evidence to indicate that life in prison or that the death penalty is a deterrent to crime, is there any way that these violent criminals, these what we consider to be worst of the worst, rapists, murderers, human traffickers, is there any way that these people can be rehabilitated in any sense? I want to hear from you guys first.
No, because life in imprisonment means you're never getting out
Ryan,
of
you
prison.
said you wanted to hear from
I
us
want to hear them first.
Pardon me,
First,
sorry.
please.
Take that.
I lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. Repeat your question.
So both of you agree that, or not agree, but the data does indicate that the death penalty and life in prison are not deterrents to crime. But that being said, there is an alternative. There is trying to rehabilitate some people. Life in prison obviously would be you're just in prison your whole life, and life and death is death. But is there any way that any of these violent criminals that we would consider to be worst of the worst can be rehabilitated?
Honestly, I think that rehabilitation is possible for most people. There are some exceptions for very, very horrible violent crimes, obviously. What I really think is that if with the death penalty and
Do you want me to take this?
yeah,
I don't think rehabilitation is the question. Like I said in my opening statement, one of the main reasons why I think the death penalty is also just not the best thing is I believe that death is too swift of a punishment. I would rather chew a jean jacket and swallow it than spend the rest of my life in prison. And I think that criminals should be treated with the same amount of respect that they treated their victims, especially violent criminals. I don't think that rapists and murderers can be rehabilitated, but I think that death is too swift for them, and I think that they should suffer the same amount that they made other people
Are you
suffer.
implying they should suffer a slow death that they inflict on their victims by the justice system?
What's said? Well, yeah, actually, exactly that.
Okay, so I want to. So she said something very controversial there. You guys agree that there could be a state-sanctioned, more slow, brutal death by the state?
Not torture. I'm not saying torture.
I'd argue that's
I'm saying just locked away.
We agree on that one.
Yeah,
we agree on that one.
I'm not saying Guantanamo
I want to hear the consensus here.
Ooh. So
That's more political.
So
actually.
my thought on that is there has been research that has been done. When someone is on death row, they are in solitary confinement. They are locked up for 23 of the 24 hours a day. They cannot talk to people. They have no social life. Meanwhile, some criminals that are in prison for life, they can get jobs. They can still hang out with people. They can still talk to people. And there's evidence that their mental health actually depletes faster on death row because they're just waiting for the execution date. Think about just sitting here being like, am I going to die tomorrow? Am I going to die in a few hours? So there's actually evidence that their mental health is actually worse for the criminals. So I disagree with your point that that is the swift and easy way to die. And I want to talk about the rehabilitation point as well. John Wayne Gacy, he was the clown killer. He killed so many people. And when he was talking about his crimes, he showed no remorse whatsoever at all. And criminals like that, I do not think can be rehabilitated. And I think there's actually a more percentage of criminals that are like that and that we have seen in the justice system that can't be rehabilitated. Now, so there's definitely some criminals that can be rehabilitated, but I agree with you, rapists, murderers like that, they can't be rehabilitated.
And I do like your point that you brought up about solitary confinement, but I think you can do that in normal penitentiaries also. I think that it has to be a case by case. It can't be that somebody that molested a child, I'm so glad we have a content warning. Oh my God. It can't be that somebody who commits a crime like that is allowed to just be milling around and having like social life with the rest of the inmates. Although there have been a lot of cases where people who have committed those kinds of crimes have also been killed by their fellow inmates. That's a whole other discussion.
That's Jeffrey Dahmer talk.
But
Jeffrey
exactly.
Dahmer talk,
But
yeah.
you can put these kind of people in solitary confinement without putting them on death row, because not only is that not the death penalty, but it's also economically better for the taxpayer, for us, because while life in prison can take out 600 to 700, the figures say, out of taxpayers' money, that's still a lot better, I would say, almost $500,000 less than how much it costs to keep an inmate on death row.
So can I make a point real quick?
One more point. Yes.
All right, so I'm gonna make a point. So have you guys heard of the 2011 Oslo attacks or the Norway attacks? Yes, you've heard of him. So obviously, we know Anders Breivik was the one who committed that. He killed upwards of 75 people. That includes children, pretending to be a law enforcement officer. He manipulated people. He tried to overthrow government. He made a joke of the trial. He manipulated his own lawyer. He was basically, to say it at the least, one of the most evil people in Norway, I would say. And do you know what his punishment was and his sentence was? Oh, do you want to guess?
No, I don't like guessing.
You don't like guessing? Come on, please, give me a guess.
Fine. A fine.
A fine? No. Come on.
20 years in prison.
Yeah, actually, yeah, close. 21 years in prison for one of the most brutal killers and a revolutionary to a government who failed to do so. So this man killed 77 people, failed his entire objective, and he only got 21 years in prison. I think he deserves the death penalty, and I don't think anyone can argue with that.
Okay. I thank both sides for being here today. This was a very, very passionate debate and a very important debate, and I'm glad that you guys were able to get everything out smoothly. I'm glad you guys kept the name calling down, and I enjoyed being here with you guys. And you guys are both very educated, lots of statistics back of what you're saying. I love this. Yes, and I'm glad that the show was able to handle this. So that's all we have for you today. I will not be declaring a winner tonight, as that is up for you all to decide in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to follow us on all socials. We will see you next week back at the desk.